Hello, my name is Kiriath, and today we're going to talk about the Warhammer 40,000 end times. Don't worry, it's not happening right now. I haven't read something, there's no sort of rumour going around that the 40k universe is coming to a explosive end, Age of Sigmar style. No, this is more just, I guess, a discussion of, firstly, whether it will happen, and should it happen, what would happen. That was a lot of ways of saying happen, and now I've confused myself. So, for a long time, for easily a good couple of years, I've seen people talk about the idea of a Warhammer 40,000 end time scenario. So, things that have kind of brought that into the open a little bit have been things like the Warhammer Fantasy universe getting scrapped and replaced with Age of Sigmar, and now the arrival of the Primarch seems to have kind of boosted the conversation up a little bit more. And I think it's an interesting conversation to have because there seems to be a couple of different kind of ideas behind why it would happen. And one of them, I think we can address straight away, is that, well, we've got Age of Sigmar now. Warhammer Fantasy was completely demolished and rebuilt from the ground up. It was got rid of. There's now a replacement system, there's replacement lore, basically a replacement universe for Warhammer Fantasy. Surely the same thing could happen to 40k. Now, in the case of 40k, whilst it would be very interesting to see what happened, and whilst it would be a really kind of surprising thing in terms of lore and story for the universe to be reset, I don't think it's anywhere near as likely as perhaps some people think it is. I see a lot of stuff where it's like, well, it happened to fantasy, surely it can happen to 40k. In the case of 40k, I think, frankly, business supersedes lore. So, one of the reasons that fantasy got reset is because, and I don't mean this in any way as an insult to any dedicated fantasy players out there who might be watching this, but no one was playing it besides you. There was a very dedicated but very small audience for Warhammer Fantasy. The system just wasn't sustaining itself and it wasn't making anything. And whilst it is nice to have the idea of, well, this system's doing fine, therefore it can carry this one, that's never how businesses work, especially if they want to grow and they want to become more successful. It's very hard to attract things like investment if you say, well, we have got this product that does nothing for us, but we keep supporting it anyway because people like it. It'd be nice if that was the case, but it very rarely is. Fantasy was at a point where just it wasn't getting the amount of custom that it needed to continue. And I would be the first to admit that just completely scrapping a whole universe, just destroying that much lore and completely replacing a system that had been around for so long with something so oversimplified was a bad idea. The end result is that actually Age of Sigmar is more popular than Fantasy was for quite some time. I mean, I know people who, you know, they played Fantasy at the time, they took a break because they were like, this is garbage, what the hell has happened? We had the end times and now they've destroyed everything that I used to like about it, and now they're playing Age of Sigmar. I know a couple of people who switched over from 40k to Age of Sigmar actually, which I've seen plenty of people switch over from Fantasy to 40k, very rarely saw it the other way round, in my experience anyway. That seems to be one of the reasons that some people think that a kind of 40k scenario would happen, you know, that an end time scenario would happen for 40k. 40k is not in anywhere near the position that Fantasy was. 40k is nowhere close to being in the same situation that Fantasy was, especially with the arrival of 8th edition. I mean, 8th edition has proven to be ridiculously popular, even still. I mean, this is another thing as well. There are certain things that have boosted, in my opinion anyway, 40k beyond what it was before. Admittedly, one of these things is the arrival of the Primaris Marines, which I know not everyone likes. You know, I like it I don't like them enough to actually collect an army of them, but I do like them. They're one of those kind of, again, another thing that I see is like, oh, well, if they have to introduce Primaris Marines, it's because it's not doing great. Or alternatively, it's because Space Marines were the most popular army, are still the most popular army, and now Primaris Marines are incredibly popular. You cannot go a day, especially on Reddit, with the Warhammer subreddit and the Warhammer 40k subreddit, and even the mini painting subreddit. If you see anything less than 2 Primaris posts a day, you're onto a rare streak there, because it's constant. There are constantly like people talking about Primaris. The same thing about Death Guard. For all the talk of Death Guard now too cartoony, which I think for me holds true. I'm not a massive fan of a few of the sculpts. I really like some of them, but some of them are just a little bit too over the top for me. They're all over the place. It is constant. They are everywhere. 8th edition is not doing badly, and that's one of the reasons I don't think the end times would actually come to 40k. Not anytime soon, anyway, with the success of 8th and the, frankly, very clever use of the specialist games, bringing things back like, Necromunda and Blood Bowl and just all the things they're bringing back. It's very well done, especially the advent of things like Betrayal at Calth and Burning of Prospero. It's very nicely calculated to, these are board games. These are specialist games. You can play these outside of 40k. Coincidentally, a few of them you can use the models in 40k, but that's not what they're there for, obviously. With the popularity of things like Kill Team as well, that's a really good gateway into full-scale 40k. I just don't see it happening from a business perspective. There's no need to reset the Warhammer 40,000 universe, not yet anyway. It's just doing too well. Fantasy wasn't doing too well, quite the opposite. It was doing too not well. Something had to be done to actually make it so that it was profitable. And now, by all accounts, it actually is, which is pretty cool, to be honest. I mean, it, as I say, sucks if you really enjoyed fantasy, but Age of Sigmar is not doing badly by any stretch of the imagination. Again, even just the collecting side of it, you will see Stormcast Eternal progress pictures all over the place every single day. It is relentless. They are everywhere. This is another thing where it's a case of every now and again you see comments like, oh great, another Primaris thing. Oh great, another Stormcast model. They sell. That's the basic gist of it. They sell, so Games Workshop makes more of them. Obviously, that is not ideal if you don't collect them. I'm not saying that it's perfect and it's brilliant and oh yes, great. As long as they keep getting models, everyone should be happy. No, because I really think that there are models in both Age of Sigmar and in 40k that drastically need a rework. There are armies that have gone basically neglected for years, which is crap, because you're only cutting down on potential customers when you show people models that are a decade old. That's the way I look at it. But that was a tangent and a half. 40k end times, not that likely. Not anytime soon, anyway. Even with the Primarchs returning, even with this kind of... It feels like we're building up to something, but again, I'd be shocked if it was actually the end times. Now, what could happen in the end times were I to be completely wrong, which has happened in the past, it's not completely completely out of the question. That is probably very likely. I'll probably announce it tomorrow now that I've made this video. What could happen is, to me, really kind of interesting, because obviously the whole universe kind of hinges around, whether you like it or not, one conflict. Now, I know that it would be really nice to think, oh no, hang on, wait a minute, what about the Orcs? What about the Tyranids? Surely they could be the catalyst for an end-time scenario in 40k. They could be, but they are not anything to do with the classic Battle of Space Marine versus Fallen Space Marine, which is kind of what the whole universe is based on. Again, it's the same thing with the Necrons. It would be nice to think that somehow the Necrons awaken the old ones, be it through being idiots and accidentally activating something that released them from some kind of ethereal prison, or just because one of them went mental and decided it'd be cool if they came back. It seems very, very unlikely. Should the end times actually occur, it will most likely be a case of the good guys of the Imperium, even though they're not that good, versus the bad guys of Chaos, even though, let's face it, dedicating yourself to the god of excess and becoming some sort of absolute maniac killer who really likes killing is infinitely more badass than just being a captain in a Space Wolves chapter. Space Wolves chapter? Space Marines chapter. Or even a Space Wolf. I mean, we just got to put it out there. I am borderline heretical, it's true, but everyone should be. It's the only way to live. Really, we've only got a few things that I think would actually occur in the end times. We'd either see Chaos winning, the galaxy being engulfed in flame, the warp expanding out into real space and swallowing everything. But if that happened, I reckon we'd end up with basically Age of Sigmar again. You would have different realms, you'd have various planets or whatever that had been protected from the warp, and instead of there being things like space combat or anything like that, things like Battlefleet Gothic would kind of go out the window if this happened, which would be kind of shitty. But I could easily see Chaos winning somehow by destroying the Emperor or whatever, and it turning into Age of Sigmar. Now that would undoubtedly be a bit garbage. I mean, Age of Sigmar basically followed 40k in terms of heroes and superhuman soldiers and created the Sigmarines, which I like the look of, but they are just Space Marines in fantasy. For 40k to then go full Age of Sigmar and have the warp engulf everything, but have separate realms for different species or different armies or different planets, that wouldn't just be meta as fuck, it would also be really boring, and I wouldn't like to see that at all. Another alternative, of course, would be the Emperor dying and then coming back to life because, well, he's the Emperor. That would be a lot more interesting because I wouldn't actually know how that would play out. He could take the fight to Chaos, and there could be some sort of grand reorganisation in terms of races. So, like the Eldar and Dark Eldar could actually fully ally with the Imperium. I mean, you could even see the Necrons joining an alliance like that because they obviously want to try and hold the warp back from spinning out into the material universe. It would be interesting, and it'd be a lot more interesting than just the warp swallows everything, because that would just be just Age of Sigmar in space, which actually, the way it's described, sometimes it does just seem like Age of Sigmar is just in some weird version of space, but there you go. I don't know, it's an interesting topic. I think going like completely adventurous, something like the old ones returning, would make for an incredibly off-the-wall end times for 40k. It would be very much out of left field. It would be pretty awesome, and I'd like to see it, but it seems very unlikely. The Tyranids, although they are a serious threat to the Imperium, I don't know if they have that much call to go gallivanting off into the warp, and given that it's basically the Imperium versus Chaos is the overarching story of the 40k universe, I don't know how that would really play out. The Orcs going mental and just rampaging across everything would be neat, but again, I think there'd be that problem of just a single enemy, and there being no sort of coherence between them and everything else. I don't know whether that would work either. To me, it does boil down to the two choices: Chaos wins, or the Emperor comes back to life. Either way, I just don't see it happening anytime soon. But the question is, what do you think? Do you think the end times are likely for 40k? Do you think they're on the horizon? Do you think we're looking at maybe in 2 editions' time, if things have died down again, if the hobby is starting to decline in popularity again, do you think we could see something like this, or do you think it'll never happen? Do you think the end times is something that was basically reserved for fantasy as a way to reboot the universe, and that 40k is pretty much safe from anything like that happening? If it did happen, what do you reckon? Chaos wins, Emperor comes back, Tyranids go mental, start eating everything, old ones come back? Can we just have Cthulhu turn up? That'd be cool. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments below, what you would expect to see, whether you expect to see it at all. Be interested to read them, as I always am. And in the meantime, thank you very much for watching. There's the usual array of garbage to click all over the screen. There's a subscribe button, there's videos. There is a Patreon button, but hold off on that because I need to work out what is going on with their stupid fee processing changes. I'll make a video about that at some point, explaining what the hell's going on because they've messed it up. And yeah, I will see you for the next video. Thank you very much for watching. Toodaloo.